All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining today. Let me go ahead and present my screen here, and we'll get started. So I am Jake Wojastic, one of the founding members of TrendSpider, and we have Chris Brecher with us, who's one of our partners and an avid user of the platform. And so we're going to go over a few different things today. Quickly, before we do any of that, just a quick disclaimer. All of the things that we'll talk about today are really a demonstration of the TrendSpider platform and how you can use this in an everyday setting. Especially for me, I'm going to go over how I typically use the platform over the weekend, especially getting ready for the week ahead with my swing trading strategies. I'm not a huge day trader, but Chris is, so he'll be going over some of those day trading strategies where he uses the TrendSpider system. For those who are not familiar with TrendSpider, really our vision is to innovate. The way charts are really done, technical analysis is done, and we're not here to replace technical analysis. We are here to complement your discretionary technical analysis. So, for example, our trend lines, our automated trend lines, our automated fibs, they're not there to replace what you're doing. They're there to be a secondary perspective, a secondary eye, if you will. So one of the ways that we've done that is through the raindrops. And so the raindrops are really a completely new way to look at volume and price action. And I'll be touching on that mostly. And we will also be going over a few different things such as heat maps, and Chris will really touch on that. But what raindrops really are, as I mentioned, they're just the VWAP adjusted time scale for price charts. And so really you've got your first half of the VWAP here, your second half of the VWAP, the first half of the session. So this can be any time frame. Let's say it's on the daily or the 5 minute. This is the first half. This is the second half. This is the VWAP for the first, VWAP for the second. And then this little dash right here is the VWAP for the entire candle. And each side has the volume profile here. And so you can see a bullish raindrop. Your VWAP for the second half of the period is going to be higher than the first half. For your neutral or your blue raindrop, the VWAP for each half period is going to equal the same pretty much exact thing. And then your bearish raindrop is going to be when the VWAP for the second half of the candle is lower than the first half. Now, a lot of the time, we can focus on, using the product and, all these things. But at the end of the day, we want to answer the question, which is why? Why should you use the platform? And what is it going to do to help add value to the process that you're currently already doing? And there's a ton of different ways that we're really doing this to fix that issue, which is bias or curve fitting. And that's through our back tester, where you can say, hey, this strategy looks really good, but you may find out that after, let's say, 3 different signals out of the 15, the signal doesn't really work that well. So the system can really back test your strategy and tell you if this is something that you're maybe adding some bias to or curve fitting, and can really give you the hard numbers. With our automated technical analysis, we can do hand-drawn inconsistencies where you're not really having to worry about essentially, these biases, how you're drawing the trend line. The inconsistencies are really erased by letting the system draw these for you. Everyone has FOMO. I've been trading for 14 years, and I find myself still doing it all the time, especially with crypto. So with TrendSpider, you can really help yourself by creating these alerts and not chase. You can have the trade come to you. With timing inefficiencies and missing key reversals, this really cuts into the alerts as well. So for example, if you are you're working all day. Some people don't have the luxury of staring at the chart all day, and some people don't really want to do that. They want to have very strict rules that they have, and they can really adhere to those rules through these different alert systems that we have. Impatience, that really cuts on to timing inefficiencies. The human distractibility, that's really easy to kind of get lost in your own thoughts and oh, maybe I should have bought this, maybe I shouldn't have. But letting the system kind of do it for you and complement hey, maybe I'm really getting too biased here, that will really help you out. Chart fatigue as well. The system can really look at a ton of different things for you without you having to essentially go through 50 different charts that you want to look for and do it that way. Before I hand it over to Chris, we really have four main functions here. We have our backtesting engine, we have our automated technical analysis, we have our multi-time frame analysis, and our cloud-based alerts. All of these things we'll be touching on, so I don't want to get too much in detail before we really go over them again, but that is how you can do these things. I'm going to hand it over to Chris now, and he will kind of introduce himself, tell you guys a little bit about his experience in the industry and how he uses TrendSpider every day. I will.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Let me share my screens, or attempt to. So you can see my screens now, right? I just want to be sure I'm not messing it up. Let me see. There. I think everybody can see them now, right? Just want to be sure I have this so everybody could see it. Great. Daryl, nice to see you. I haven't heard from you in a long time. So just to let you know, I run Brecher Trading. It's a trading training site. That's the beauty of working with TrendSpider. TrendSpider provides the charts. I sort of know how to trade. So I've been trading for 38 years, was on the Chicago Board Options Exchange for 8 years in the 80s and 90s, and then worked for a New York City day trading firm for 9 years. And I was in well, let's put it this way. If you know anything about day trading, my old boss is a client and he refuses to get comped. He insists on paying because he says it's so valuable. So obviously I did okay in those years. So just to let you know on how I use TrendSpider, the first thing you have to understand is I use very few indicators. So I just use what you see on the left. I hope you could see this. I just use a 50 simple moving average, a 20 simple moving average, a 9 exponential, and I'll look sometimes at the 200-day. And then I use the MACD on the bottom, the 3, 10, 16. Now, TrendSpider is going to have the ATR trailing stop, which is I use a lot. But in the meantime, if you don't have that, just use a cross of the 20 and the 9. And that's the closest approximation to the ATR trailing stop. And that's what I use in there. The other thing, I use a lot heat maps. Now, let me explain what the heat maps are. There's a real cool tutorial on TrendSpider all about how they determine them. But it's sort of the way that I trade. So let me just go in and what I'm talking about in here. The idea is the more points of contact, the more important. That's why TrendSpider has all the trend lines you could draw. The second thing is the more horizontal the trend line, the more important. And the reason for that is then there's very little resistance or support underneath or over it. And it's I call them air holes. So that's how I use heat maps. So the more points of contact, the more red the heat map. And those, it's just a visual way to get you where you need to go. So that's how I use them. The other thing is, and I do this on my site, I use at least 4 time frames. So I'll use a daily because the overall trend, whether it's the stock, whether it's the broad market, the overall trend is always the most important. The second thing is then I have an hourly. Then I have a 15 and a 5. When I do my 6-period charts, I usually have daily, hourly, 15, 5, and 1. Now, the things they use and that I use, the raindrops, which are sort of in beta, I basically use those. Right now, you can't have them on a 1 minute or a 5 minute, just the way that it's calculated. So I'll look at a lot of different iterations to try to get an idea of where support and resistance is. The best part about this is when I'm looking at 100 charts, if I scroll through them, it's a lot nicer to be able to see graphically the support and resistance. Like I said, the more red, the more important. So, I mean, just keep that in mind in there. So I just want to show you a couple of things of the broad market and how I use TrendSpider. So the first thing I want to show you with the broad market, just want to show you this with the SPY. I put it in wrong, sorry. And you're going to see it a mile away. Now I'm going to go put this on raindrops on the right on an hourly chart. So all I have up here is a daily chart, a 1 hour chart, a 15, and then I have a bar chart of 5 minutes just so for the day trading, to satisfy my day trading kind of way of looking at things. The thing is, I'm not going to go in the specifics of the raindrops. TrendSpider can do that. I'm wanted to go in more on the support and resistance and the air holes, so to speak. So the first thing you're going to notice is when you broke up over that big red line on the SPX or the SPY, when you back tested, now you could sit there without the heat maps and say, yeah, we hit support, but it sure is nice to know it's not just that support, it's this support and this support. So if you're not familiar with these kinds of supports, you know there's a big support right there. Now, why is that important? Because when you went down right then, and that was just in end of June, you had everybody predicting Armageddon. But that's the whole thing that we were talking about earlier about fear of missing out. So that keeps you from shorting in the hole, so to speak, where you're shorting where you're oversold at support. And that's where the TrendSpider comes in really handy to know where not to mess around. On the other hand, look at a 5 minute chart. So now you see what we're talking about for tomorrow. If this doesn't hold this little area, yeah, there's a little air hole of about a point. So just a point, and then you have another point. Is it really worth a point here or there? Well, that's why you look for the big air hole, so to speak. As you see, there's not a lot of resistance overhead. So I'm going to be watching that carefully tomorrow. But I want to show you something really interesting. I wanted to show you an example of this a little later in Overstock. But right now, I'll just show you the SPY. As you see, and I'll just go through them real quick. You see the SPY, you might think, because I know you read a lot over the weekend, that we're going to get go down and all this. Then let me just give you my theory. This is from my video this weekend for subscribers. You got July 30th. You got the Fed meeting where everybody's worried or excited that they're going to cut. So it's July 30th through the 31st. And then on the 31st is when they make their decision. You're probably going to drift before that. As you see, you got a big old support in here. And the markets are at highs, so you got to, you're going to have to be choosy, but you're probably going to drift. But that means individual stocks are going to be the way to go in the next 23 days. So that's how I'm going to look at it, is individual stocks. So you see, until proven otherwise, we're in an uptrend. So just keep that in mind, and that's what I'm watching really carefully. So that's one thing. NDX, QQQ, any of those you want to use. So that's the ETF for the NASDAQ 100. You'll see it's sort of the same thing. And let me just tell you, my favorite thing is chart patterns. If I don't have a discernible chart pattern, that's when I use the support and resistance even more. But if you can have a discernible chart pattern combined with these lines, it's extremely powerful. What am I talking about? Go look at the QQQ on a daily chart right there. You had a bull flag at support, big support. So you knew where your exit plan is if you were wrong. So let's just go into that and I'll show you. As you see, you had that bull flag. You were working off some overbought with the MACD. Now I use a MACD, but you can use an RSI or stochastic. But as you see, you stopped in that zone. You knew your exit plan is if it couldn't hold that zone. Now there are two ways to play it. You could try to buy it in that zone, or you wait until it sort of had escape velocity, so to speak, when it got over that zone. So as you see with that raindrop, it got over that zone at the very end of the day, and you had a chance to jump on it. So, but these become graphically extremely important and exciting. So I just wanted to show you the SPY and the QQQ. There's nothing that's showing you anything bad yet. Now, if you listen to my video, and I did a free video also that's on YouTube. I look at sentiment indicators also, and there's some warning signs, no doubt about it. If you go to StockTwits, go to the SPY. StockTwits is free. It's not competing with TrendSpider. It's not even charts, but it's a message board basically, or a Twitter feed for stock hobbyists, so to speak. But the SPY, they have a sentiment on the right, and the sentiment is the highest now that it's been since May before the big sell-off. So I'm just telling you the sentiment's up there, but you have to combine it with other criteria, and I just don't see it yet. How about the IWM? You're going to see it's over everything barely, but it is over. So that's so I'm watching all those indexes. I watch carefully. The other thing I'm watching is the TLT, which is the is the iShares 20-year bond ETF. And now this is what we were talking about earlier, fear of missing out. Everybody thinks this is going to go down. And, you know, the bonds are a bubble. Now, I think they're going down, but why is it tough to do now? Because of this amazing amount of support zone. So every time you try to short when it's oversold on an hourly chart, every time you're losing money. Every single time for a month. Because every time it sells off, it gets oversold in this massive support zone. Now, before you're wondering, well, how do they even get that line? Take off the heat map. And you could see all the points of contact. And that's how the heat map's drawn in the first place. It's going to be real tough to get through all that. That's where I know you go crazy. You probably don't like hearing it. But that's why a lot of times technicians talk about it's a better sale under there. So even though you're going to have to give up a point, then you have less support. So that's what we're talking about. And you see what happens under 130. That's the famous thing I call the air hole.
The air hole.
Get under that, there's nothing. Just nothing underneath for a while. So that's exciting in there. So that's what I'm looking at. The other thing, you're probably going to want to know about gold. So you could do it either GLD, GC, either. And you're going to see on here that this is how I'm looking at it. This is why everybody's getting frustrated with gold. Now, you might say, but it's a gap. It could go straight up until you see all these areas over here where it stopped. That's why there's this resistance in this zone. You can see it on the 5-minute clearly also. Now, on the other hand, if it gets over this right here, 133.5, there's nothing. So it's going to be a really exciting week. I wonder if it's just going to drift, but this could be a bull flag. So as you see, if it gets over, this is where you combine chart patterns. So if it breaks above here, not only is it breaking the red heat map, but it's breaking a bull flag. So just keep that in mind. And the other one I wanted to mention was Bitcoin. So I just want to show you something interesting in Bitcoin. And this is combining TrendSpider's trend lines that are automatically generated, even though this was a week ago, week ago. We were getting long right there. See that bull flag? Let me go and zoom it in. So this is where trend lines do work. Do you see that trend line? That's a bull flag. And when it broke that, it exploded. I mean, it exploded quickly, literally within about 20 minutes. Very interesting there. Now, is this thing perfect? No, but it made you the money if you did the measuring expectation. It got you there. And where was the first place to stop? That red area. So just keep that in mind. The other thing I'm watching in Bitcoin now is it going to stay above this area? Look at this area on the right. If it stays above here, it definitely could go higher. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's going to, because you could draw lines all these places. But I'm just saying that if it stays above that red support line, it could go higher. That's where this visually helps. I just think it's amazing how it helps. The other thing I wanted to show you was overstock. And I promised I'd show that one. And I just want to show you on how we played it. So when Bitcoin broke out, you saw that bull flag in Bitcoin. Overstock, you can see this a mile away of the, well, you can see this a mile away. Let me show you. Remember we talked about if you had a bull flag combined with these heat maps? Check that out. Is that beautiful or what? So there's your bull flag. You could combine it with Bitcoin having a bull flag. And guess what? It held where it needed to hold. We talk about that all the time. Then you had that air hole. So maybe you didn't make that, but at least that was a $1.20 on a $10 stock in a very short amount of time because there was very little resistance. As you see, the reaction after the big old move, the reaction came back right to the top, right to this red line. And I mean, it worked absolutely beautiful. In fact, this worked probably better than any stock I've seen, and it's only a $10 stock. I mean, that's literally, this was about 14%, and the whole move was about 40%. So it's pretty exciting when that works. And I just wanted to show you on how I use it. And you could use it for day trading too. I mean, my thing is, and I can't stress this enough, I want to, let's say you have a certain amount of money and a certain amount of time to trade in the day. You don't want to take stocks like VC. Let me just show you what I'm talking about. And this is where the red does help you. You're going to see on here the nice bear flag on the right. If you don't have a heat map up, let me just show you. You might be saying, yeah, that's a bear flag. This stock is going to break down. But then when you put the heat map up, you're going to see that it's a bear flag at support. So when I look at a bull flag, bear flag, any kind of breakdown or break up or any other chart pattern, I want to be sure that it's not a chart pattern, a bearish pattern at big support. I'll have to then find another opportunity. That's going to take up a lot of my equity, so to speak, and my time. If I pick a stock like that, it's less likely to work. So you want stocks that have an air hole if you're bearish. In fact, I'll show you one. Broadcom was a beauty. So as you see on here, when the stock, let me see if right here, look at this. We were pointing this one out right there. So if it didn't hold there, it had nothing on the way down, as you see, and that's what happened. Interesting, the reason I'm bringing it up, you got to watch it on Monday, because what happens if it doesn't hold here? As you see, it's got a lot of support, but if it doesn't hold this zone, you know, it could go much lower. So if it does hold this zone, maybe it can bounce back to the 285 level, but you could see this on multiple time frames, how important that 282 area is. So I'll be watching Broadcom very closely. So I hope that makes sense. Let me see. Yeah. By the way, Drew asked, can this be used to day trade index futures? Yeah, it can. Now let me just show you on how. I'll just show you. Now I don't know. I'm not looking at it tonight. The ESs are up all at 2 points tonight. But when I'm trading it, take a 1 minute chart and let's see if it worked. Now, I want to make clear that I'm not just using this. I'm using all the indicators I showed you. And there's, you know, more than one thing that I watch. So I just want to keep that clear. When you go into this, I would rather use the SPY just because it seemed to bounce against more levels. And I can show you a 1 minute chart. So let me go and put this in here. Give me a second. There. I mean, there you go right there. This is a 5 minute chart. So if you were buying the SPY in here, now this is on July 3rd, look at the lack of resistance on the way up. Then when it sold off, and some of this was right on near the opening, it consolidated that red line. But then when it got above it, there was very little resistance overhead for another $1. So you definitely can use it. Look what happens tomorrow. If this gets over the 298.5, there's going to be very little resistance. But if it can't hold the 298, it could snap back to that 297. So yeah, you could definitely use it for day trading. No doubt about it in there. The other thing, and I forgot to mention it, one last thing I'll give you is, so there are a lot of people in here, I'm sure, that want a day trade or want a long-term trade. One thing I didn't mention is a really cool feature of TrendSpider. They have great alerts. So a lot of times, let's say you want to trade off a 5-minute chart in the SPY. So I just want to show you something really interesting. Let's say you want to just do this. Believe it or not, there are a lot of algorithms that do this. Most algorithms are really simple. So all they're doing is taking the 9 EMA when it crosses the 20 on the upside or the downside. That's it. That's all they're doing. And they buy when it gets above it. Now, I'm not saying you have to automatically buy or sell. What I'm telling you is if you're long it and you just happen to have to do errands, you can get a text alert if they cross. So I thought I'd show you how to do that in a quick way. So what I'm going to do is go to create alert. So I'm going to take an indicator, but I want multi-factor because I'm doing 2 different indicators. So all I'm doing is I'm adding a parameter. And I'm telling you, once you do it once or twice, it's really easy to do. I mean, literally in 10 seconds. So right now, let's go and take this. I'm going to take it on right now on a raindrop. So that I have to do a 10-minute. So I'm going to take an indicator. So I'm going to take an exponential moving average, a 9. And then I'm going to say if it's crossed down from an indicator on a 10-minute of that 20. And that's it. So the exponential moving average crossing down below the 10. And I want to create an alert. And that's it. So I've just created an alert. The next, so this will get text to me, emailed to me, and it'll do a beep. So 3 different ways. The other thing that's neat is, let's say you're like, boy, I wish I had that on Apple. Well, you go and press this little button here. Let me try to move this over. Sorry about that. And you take this little button that's cloned. And when you clone, what you do now is you go to Apple. And now when you go to SPY, you do clone, and now it's an Apple alert, the exact same one, and you create the alert. Now I got Apple and the SPY over here. So that's a quick way to, you could do it on 20 of your stocks. So now where does that become important? What happens is, let's say you do an alert on Amazon and Facebook, and both of them, you get an alert that their 9 EMA is crossing the 20. Those are big leaders, 2 big FANG stocks. Then that's a big alert if you're only watching Apple that, hey, they're starting to cross. Maybe I got to start being more defensive in the rest of the high beta stocks I'm trading. So that's the way I do it. I think those are multiple ways that I trade, and I hope that sort of helps on how I use TrendSpider. So take it easy, and I think I'm going to give it back to TrendSpider right now. If you have any other questions, let me know.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. That was a huge help, and we really appreciate that. I will go ahead and take over real quick, and I'm just going to show a couple ways that I personally use it. And as we mentioned before, disclaimer, these are simply the kind of general ways that I'm using the platform. This is by no means advice, but I wanted to go over SPY versus QQQ in a little bit of a different way that Chris did, and that was looking at this area that we're at on the weekly chart. And so if we have SPY here, we can see that we've got all-time highs tested in 2018, and then a huge move down. And then we've got the 2019 all-time highs that we tested, but we actually broke through finally and closed above this very critical area. So for me, this looks pretty bullish, and that's simply just because there's a breakout. I mean, anything can happen. So for me, looking at the weekly, this is kind of the zones that I'm watching. But then when we go to the daily, we can see that there's a very defined ascending wedge here. And at the end of the day, I have no idea what's going to happen. But what I do know is that if the price breaks down below or above these 2 lines, that's kind of what I would call a status quo changer. So The best way that I generally like to use these alerts is by creating an alert on both ends. Now, you can use this with a wedge, you can use it with a channel, you can use it with a falling wedge. Anything that has a defined price range that you can capture with trend lines, you can create these alerts. So here we're creating an alert on the top area here for resistance. We'll make the sensitivity. And the cool thing about sensitivity, for those who have not used it before, you can really define your margin of error, because at the end of the day, a trend line being drawn with a pencil is not the way to do it. And I forgot who quoted that, and drawing trend lines with a crayon, but you really need a zone rather than a precise point. So moving this to the right or the left, you're going to see that these price areas are changing. So with this specific sensitivity zone right here, the price is going to fire within $1.47 of this line. Now, for me, I don't want to make it that much of a zone. I want to keep it still pretty small. So we'll keep it right around about 50 cents above or below this line. We'll do wedge resistance. I usually watch for 14 days have expired. If you want this to be triggered more than one time, you can choose up to 10 times. And I chose all of the different triggers. This is really dynamic, where you can really choose how the price action is affecting the trend line. Not affecting, but how it's engaging with the trend line, if you will. So if we're breaking through, if we're touching, if we're bouncing, the system can really distinguish between those three different triggers. And so that's what really makes it unique, especially for our platform. Now, in this case, we do have all of these things set up. All we have to do is create the alert, and now this alert is created on the trend line. I'll do the same thing for the lower part of the wedge here. And so this case, as I mentioned, I have no idea what's going to happen. If I did, I would probably be living on an island somewhere, but I'm not. So in that case, we've got the 10-minute candle here. We've got a possible breakdown, wedge support, and we'll have that expire in 14 days too. So anytime the price action breaks down below any of these, I'll be alerted. Now, what's really interesting about this daily raindrop on Friday's price action is we had what we call kind of a flip. And so you can see here the first half of the day, and just to distinguish or kind of look at this and decipher this last candle we had on Friday, the first half of the period, we can see that a lot of that volume was focused near the low of the day. In the second half of the period, you can see that we kind of flipped over, where a lot of the price action was focused at the top of the high of the day here. So we can see that there was, and if we really zoom in, you can see this is the VWAP. We had no volume below the daily VWAP here for the second half of the period. All of that volume actually pushed the price up to new highs. So we can see that towards the end of the second half of the day, or excuse me, towards the end of the day in the second half of the period, most of that volume was really on the bullish side of things. Now, if anything really breaks down, if this does kind of false breakout here, we can easily create an alert for a possible breakdown of these lower indicators. I personally like to use the MACD and their relative strength index, but I also use a number of other ones. But for the example here, we'll just do the MACD. We can create the alert similar to what Chris did. In this case, I'll do a possible breakdown. We'll have it expire in 14 days and triggered one time. And so here for the MACD, I'm looking for the fast to essentially break down through the slow. So that's this blue line breaking down through the slow. So last time we crossed here, you can see that we had a nice move down. So what we can do is condition the daily indicator. In this case, we have the MACD fast has crossed down through the MACD slow. We can see now that anytime this occurs, we'll be alerted. So, I don't have to stare at the chart and pull up this chart every single day at a specific hour. The system is going to alert me right when that happens. Now, we also want to look at the second time, or the second indicator, which is the RSI here, and this is the 10 period. So this is looking back 10 days and spitting out a formula for us. In this case, we can see, we've got this higher high here on the raindrop, but then we kind of double topped here on the RSI. We've got this green raindrop, but we've got a downtick on the RSI. what we can do here for a possible breakdown on the RSI as well, we can add a second condition. In this case, it's the daily indicator, relative strength index, has crossed down below. In this case, we're doing a constant level. So if the RSI breaks down below, let's say 60 here, we'll be alerted. So we have the constant level of 60. So when both of these alerts are become true, or these conditions become true, we will be alerted. Create alert. Then you can go to your widget here, alert list, and we'll see here that the SPY possible breakdown is right here. And we can go and edit it if we'd like, if we want to add more conditions. And on top of that, we can always test the strategy before we create the alert. I will go into the back tester a little bit here with the blue raindrops. So with the raindrops, as I mentioned, we have a green one here because the right side's VWAP, which is the second half of the period, is higher than the left side. But the blue raindrops are something that is very interesting. And we'll go into that deeper here with Amazon shortly. Really responsive stock to blue raindrops, both to the upside and the downside. One thing that I wanted to mention here with the weekly, and this is another way that you could add a second alert here. Notice that the MACD has really topped out right around 5.78, 5.8, and that's really when the fast has topped out. The slow never really got there. So if we wanted to maybe test this area and see, anytime that the blue, which is the fast, crosses above, let's say 6, we can do that by just going to create alert. In this case, we have, let's say, MACD breakout, expires in 14 days, or let's do 30 days. And what we can do here is the condition. In this case, we need to change this, actually. Sorry, 1 second. Create alert, multi-factor alert. I'm having trouble adding weekly here. So without adding the weekly, for some reason I'll have to check with the dev team there. But if we did want the weekly MACD fast to break above this area, we can easily do that just like we did the MACD fast breaking below the slow. In this case, instead of using an actual indicator value, we would just be using a constant value here. Looking at QQQ, we can see something very interesting on the weekly, which I mentioned. We have not actually broken through these all-time highs yet that the SPY ETF did this week. So it will be interesting to see if we break through what I would call kind of this ascending wedge here, and really see if this is something that has some energy to it, or if this could just be another false breakout. It seems like every time we've hit all-time highs here, we generally will at least have some type of small pullback. Same thing with the Qs. I have an alert set for both sides of the wedge here. If we do break down, we will be alerted either way it goes. Bullish or bearish, whichever way. I'll know, okay, do we think that this is a false breakdown? Is this a bigger breakdown? Or if we break through, is this really a fake out, or does this really have some legs to it? So going into the raindrops, I am going to focus on Amazon, and a couple things about Amazon which are kind of interesting, and you can really see this across a lot of the FANG stocks. We've got this interesting kind of inverse head and shoulders here on the daily, where we've got our shoulder here, our head, and then our second shoulder. But before I kind of start talking about that, I want to introduce a new raindrop. So I'll be going over the balloon raindrop right now, as well as the blue raindrop and how to back test that on Amazon. So the balloon raindrop may sound kind of weird, kind of a weird name to it, but it's really simple, right? So what we have here is we've got a very defined downward sloping channel. This raindrop, one, really only forms when we're breaking out of a very crucial level of resistance. In this case, we're breaking out of channel resistance, but it's the same thing if we're breaking out of wedge resistance or a triangle resistance. It's really showing us a couple things. And so when I zoom in here, we'll see that this balloon has some very defined characteristics, if you will. We can see that, we've got the high of day here, we've got the low of day here, and we can see that from this volume profile that this actually did have volume from the low of the day all the way to the high of the day within the first half of the period. Now, what we can see here is there wasn't a lot of volume that really caused the price to break through this area. So in other words, you could essentially say that the market was thin, meaning that there wasn't a lot of supply above to push the price through this crucial area. Now, what we see is at some point during the first half of the period, there was a lot of volume that started to accumulate towards the top of the high of the day, or near the high of the day. When we switch over to the second half of the day, we can see that there was no volume at all below the VWAP, and it almost looks like, you know, there's hot air rising similar to, or demand is rising similar to a hot air balloon. And it's one of those things that it needs to form at a specific part on the chart. So for example, you know, we have kind of a very similar looking balloon here, and notice how we didn't necessarily have that continuation because we had already broken out here, and that was pretty much our continuation candle before we did move up more. What's really cool about this entire chart is we didn't just break out of the raindrop kind of channel here, we also broke out of the resistance. So this vertical line can show us that first, we actually broke out of this RSI resistance channel. And I like to use RSI channels or any type of channel in the RSI or any lower indicator, just like I do price action. It acts very similar, and this is a great example where we broke out. This was our initial breakout on the RSI channel, and then we continued to break out with this balloon through the price channel the next day. So all in all, very cool, very under-researched, if you will. This is still very much in research mode, but we are continuing to find some really important levels in which this forms. Now, you know, as I mentioned, definitely want to make sure you're looking at one of these around a crucial breakout area. These can easily false signal, no different than if you looked at a hammer at the wrong place on the chart. A hammer is really only a hammer at the bottom of a very defined reversal area, and you know, there's continuation. So you're always going to have these defined kind of criteria for this particular candle. But for example, with the blue, you don't always have to have that defined criteria. With the blue raindrops, what you'll find here is essentially, you know, this at the end of the day is really just a volatility signal, if you will. If we go back and really kind of do this, and I'm just going to kind of delete all the drawings here to do this example. You know, when we go to the back tester here, all we have to do is, and I've already done this, is put in the raindrop doji. And in this case, our entry condition is evolved. The raindrop, our exit condition is after 7 candles. Now, each chart is going to be a little different. I've found that the blue raindrops can false signal a lot more with, for example, a smaller cap stock or a less liquid stock. But with your ETFs like SPY, the Qs, Amazon, you're generally going to find some pretty heavy volatility. And we'll just do 3 candles at this point, and we'll test this out. And so anytime a blue candle has formed, we're going to see what the return is after 3 candles. When we see this on the chart, you'll see that there's some pretty big moves. Now, some of these moves took a little longer. For example, this move here, we've got our entry and our exit is about 0.15 after. Now, if we change this to 7 candles or 10, you can see that that was a massive move later. Same thing here. After 3 candles, there was a negative 2.32% return. So if we go and let's do, we'll retest this under 7 candles, you'll see some of these entries and exits are huge. And all I have to do is click on See on Chart, and you'll see each individual move. Here's 1.98% on Amazon within 7 candles, within 7 days. That's a pretty big move, especially if you're trading the options market. You know, some people trade options, some people don't. But even in common stock, you know, 1.98% move in a 7-day period is a pretty big move. And that's one of the smaller moves. If you look back here, here's an entry and an exit within 4.53% after 7 days. Here's another one, 3.94. So, there's not always that signal that says if it's a buy or a sell, if it's going to go up or not. It's generally just telling us there's volatility on the way. And so for those that trade options, a straddle strategy may be the way to possibly approach that. I'm not giving advice out. I personally don't really trade options, but those who do have been very interested in possibly testing out this strategy. Now, one thing that I wanted to mention, there are times on the chart where the blue raindrop will actually kind of show us some interesting things. So just to wrap this up before we take any questions, I want to show you guys XLF. And XLF is a really cool case study where we've got a very defined falling wedge here. And what you can see is we've got our resistance. And then after we've got our resistance, we've got this blue raindrop that forms. And immediately within the next 5 days, we've got a huge move down. So in this case, this was kind of foretelling that we had this blue raindrop on resistance. And after we moved down, we had a blue raindrop form right on this support area, and we had a big move up. Now notice that this isn't necessarily a textbook balloon, but it's got the same characteristics where a lot of the volume is focused near the high of the day. And in this case, the high of the day there was a new high of the day in the second half of the period is what I'm trying to say, because you can see that there was no volume profile on the first half. And so we know that this volume created the new high of the period here during the second half of the day. We have our breakout, we have a continuation up, we've got another blue raindrop form, and then we've got a few days of continuation down. So all in all, blue raindrops are really a sign of possible volatility, especially with these higher liquidity stocks such as your FANG stocks, your ETFs like SPY, the Qs, that type of thing. And you can always back test these. All you have to do is go to the strategy tester, input the raindrop. If you want to see how that's done really quick, you just go to add parameter here. The condition would be the candlestick pattern. And we'd scroll down to, in this case, this is the raindrop doji. And we'll test it after 5 candles. And we'll see here, especially on this chart, there's some nice moves within this general area on the chart that we're looking at. So when we see this on the chart, this is a 2.46% drop within 5 candles. And then we've got a 5% move after that. So TrendSpider is really here to make your life more efficient, especially on the technical analysis side. It's not there to complement, or it's not there to replace what you're doing by hand. It's there to complement it. All in all, we do have a ton of things coming on the roadmap, and I'll go over this roadmap very quickly. Some of the things that we recently introduced are multi-factor alerts, the raindrop candles, which have now been around for about a month and a half, and a lot of the new things like the strategy tester. So these are all still very new. Still very much in beta mode, some of these things where we're going to continue to improve and add to the functionality. When we get into Q3, which we're in now, we're going to be adding a number of different things. Some of those things we've actually already completed, such as the multiple workspaces. We are working on backtesting enhancements, enhancing drawing tools, adding some very cool VWAP indicators that we're really excited to announce, and a global templates manager, as well as more history. So if you've noticed, you can only go back 320 candles on the TrendSpider platform. So that will be added to. So for example, you can go back 320, 640, 960, and we'll be adding to that. So you can really add some time there. When we get into the last quarter of the year, we're going to be working on some scanning capabilities, watch list alerts on an actual watch list. So for example, instead of having to create 10 different alerts individually, you'll be able to create a watch list, put the alert on the entire watch list, and when any of those stocks hit that specific criteria that you've implemented, that's when you'll get the alert. Chart pattern recognition, such as head and shoulders patterns, cup and handles, that type of thing, and we will be continuing to expand our alert functionality as well. Going into 2020, that's really when we start getting into the brokerage side of things, integrating our API into different brokerage data. So instead of using our data, you're able to use your own data, whatever brokerage platform that is, and you'll actually be able to make trades through the platform. So we're really looking forward to a lot of these different things. And we're still small startups, so I don't want to apologize for any delays, but it's just kind of part of the game, and we're working as hard as we can to make the best product out there. And really, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask now. If you are interested in signing up or starting a free trial, you can sign up through TrendSpider.com, and you can use Brecher 20 for 20% off for 12 months, and that's Chris's code that we've implemented for him as one of our partners. All right, let's see. Can you toggle in and out between the two types? Dan, I'm trying to figure out which questions you've answered and which ones still need to be addressed. Toggling in and out, I'm not sure what exactly we mean by that. Oh yeah, you can toggle in and out very easily. So for example, changing the chart type, all you need to do is go to this button right here, click it, and you can toggle between any of the different chart types here. So if we wanted to go to hollow candles, we just click here and we'll be taken to the hollow candles. So yes, the 20% off that we just went over is for any plan. So that is including the 1-year subscription, the monthly, or the quarterly, to answer your question, Mary Beth. Yes, the heat maps will work on all time frames. So for example, each time frame is going to be slightly different based on how the heat maps are calculated, but you can go through, really any. So let's just go to a different, maybe Home Depot. If we toggle through all of the different areas here, let me just kind of clean this up a little bit. Go on the 2-hour, turn on the heat map, and this is the 2-hour chart. We want to go and see the daily heat map. Might need to turn off gaps or something. Not sure why this is not full. Oh, there we go. I had to refresh the chart. These are the daily heat maps. Yeah, so you can really toggle between all of them. Looks like Dan's answering that question. You're very welcome. Anybody else have any questions? I'm happy to address really anything that we went over, especially on the core features side of things. Or raindrops. Raindrops are very new as well. All right, so Dan, creating an alert. See the clone button for creating an alert. So we'll see here, if you guys can see my screen, essentially we've got the edit button, we've got the clone button. So when you click on this clone button, you'll be able to clone that to any stock that you'd like. Heat map tutorial is just on TrendSpider.com. If you go to blog, you will see, I'm not sure exactly where it is, but we do have, I think it's under the user guide. Yep, the horizontal heat maps are right here. And these are the different steps that the system takes to create these areas. And so you can check that out just at blog and then go to TrendSpider User Guide. So do we have tutorials for chart patterns as well? What we do have is we have different blog posts looking over a ton of different things. So we have different areas on the blog that you can explore, such as candlestick patterns, technical indicators. We do have individual blog posts that look at some of these different patterns. If you go far enough back, some of the older posts, I definitely remember going over some bull flags, that type of thing. So you can definitely check those out all in the blog section of the website. To answer your question, Caesar. Alrighty. Well, okay, got one. We do not have any pivots yet. We are working on adding a ton of more indicators. Right now we have 57, and you can see all of the different indicators. If you go to the indicators tab here, Mary Beth, and click the 3 vertical dots, you'll see you can look for any indicator. So you can also do the abbreviation. If you'd like to do just RSI, it will choose like that. But right now we do not have pivot areas. We will try to make that a little easier to get to, Caesar. I apologize if it's a little complicated to get to. But really, all of the subcategories are here. And so if you'd like to really explore any of these, that's where you can kind of dig deeper and find some of those more in-depth articles. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions, and thank you everybody for really attending. I know it's a Sunday evening and everybody's probably got family time to attend to, and so just want to thank everybody again so much for attending. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out, and we will definitely get to your questions as soon as possible. You can do that through hello@trendspider.com, or you can do that through our social media accounts, all just @TrendSpider, and we will try to get to you guys as quick as we can with any questions that you have. Thank you again. Alrighty, we will be signing out. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great night, and we will do another one of these really soon. We're trying to do these at least 2 times a month. So if anyone's interested in attending any more of these, please feel free to register when we do have these available on our social media posts. We'll have the registration link, just like we did today, and you'll be able to jump in and register very easily. Thank you again, Chris, for jumping on. We really appreciate everything you have done helping get the word out with TrendSpider, and we look forward to doing another one of these with you soon.
Yeah, thanks. I'm looking forward to it too. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, you're very welcome, and good luck trading this week. What do you overall? What are you thinking?
I'm thinking there's going to be some volatility. No, all kidding aside, I think we're going to be sort of trendless until the Fed meeting. So I'm just looking for individual stocks, but I got to think that the small cap stocks are going to start outperforming. Just because everything else is at an all-time high, you start to get the animal spirits, and you start to get the $2 to $15 stocks starting to kick in. Yep. You know, you saw it start with PYX, with Overstock, and so I think there are going to be a lot of them to start, definitely putting in trendline alerts using TrendSpider.
Yeah, it looks interesting here. It's interesting to see. We had this very similar candle before, but sometimes I like to see these. It's kind of showing we kind of got a blast off. So either way, we'll see what happens. Again, thank you so much for joining. We'll have to do this again soon, and we'll talk to everyone soon. Have a great Sunday evening. Thank you so much.